persisting in the UK. They're being ignored too. So says a report by the Resolution Foundation think tank. It says that typical Bangladeshi and Pakistani household incomes are over a third lower than the average white British household. Incomes for black African households are a fifth lower. Joining us now from central London is Farah Elahi, a research and policy analyst at the Runnymede Trust. Welcome to you. To what do you account this discrepancy?
I think this discrepancy ties in with the research that the Runnymede Trust has been doing for decades now, highlighting the significant labour market inequalities and barriers to employment and progression that ethnic minority communities face.
Because as I look at the figures, there's another story emerging. I mean, Pakistani and Bangladeshi pay, this is for men, since 2001 has risen 28%. 28% rise since 2001, which is pretty rapid by any measure. Over the same period, other ethnicities saw their pay rise not by 28% but by 1%. So Pakistani and Bangladeshi men are seeing a very sharp increase in their incomes. Isn't the problem here that actually Pakistani and Bangladeshi women are simply not joining the workforce, they're not going into employment, and that has the effect of dragging household income right down?
I think there's a gender element there, but even despite the increases in the pay rates for Pakistani and Bangladeshi men, they're still less likely to earn as much as white British men.
Surely not for long. If your pay is going up by a quarter in 15 years, it won't be long till parity is achieved, surely.
Yeah, and similarly with gender, we're seeing increasing participation rates from ethnic minority women. But even when we're seeing that, ethnic minority women continue to face the same barriers that ethnic minority men face in terms of entering the labour market, and not just entering, but entering kind of the higher wage profession. So even where part of the problem is that the concentration of ethnic minorities in low wage sectors. So, for example, when we look at the recent data released by the BBC, in the high earners, very, very few ethnic minority people are represented. So it's about also ensuring that there's representation across the different elements of the labour market, so that you're not just concentrated in low wage sectors, but you're seeing that representation at higher wages as well, which is really going to affect household incomes.
How do you encourage more Pakistani and Bangladeshi women into the workplace?
Well, I think we need to ensure that there's support around whether there's English language, whether there's discrimination in the when they're going for interviews. The research shows that if you have an ethnic minority sounding name, you're less likely to get shortlisted for an interview. So we really need to address these barriers in terms of the entry into the labour market.
Is that still abundantly true? Because people have an impression that in the public sector, making separation, for instance, between the public sector and private sector, in the public sector, that there are enough affirmative action programs out there to ensure that actually your ethnicity may, and maybe this is a misapprehension, you'll tell me, I'm sure, that it may end up being an advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Absolutely not. I mean, the most recent report by the government, the Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith review, found that actually ethnic minorities still face significant barriers within both the public and the private sector. And actually, one of the reasons why we really welcome the BBC data being released is that we can see that actually even now, despite whatever kind of discussions we've had around inequality and discrimination, we're not actually seeing a change in outcomes and change in behaviours and labour market practices.
Again, I mean, you may know better than I, but there's an impression out there that Indian households, Chinese households, when it comes to the labour market and pay, do very well, certainly compared to the contrast we're drawing with Pakistani and Bangladeshi households. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think even with Indian and Chinese households, they're still less likely. So, for example, when they leave university, it still takes them longer to find a job with equivalent qualifications compared to white British. But I think we need to understand the migration patterns, so for what communities came in with, educational levels, etc., and whether that acted as an advantage when they were joining the labour market here. Yeah,
you mentioned you make the point that the contrast is drawn with white British households. Other people will say that's a clumsy analysis because you've got the white working class, much of which has been said and written about in recent years. I know the Runnymede Trust don't necessarily like that term, but there is that apprehension, isn't there, that you've got one of the biggest problems in terms of ethnic groups who are not getting on in life is with the white working class.
Well, I think absolutely the white working class have been let down by successive governments, but when you're looking at ethnic minority communities, about 10% of the white British population would be categorized as working class compared to 40% of, let's say, the Pakistani population. So we're absolutely not saying that all white British communities have an advantage over all ethnic minority communities, but it's about saying that actually class is a significant element here, and both white working class communities are disadvantaged by that, but also ethnic minority communities. The Runnymede Trust has released a report on class and the fact that actually there's a shared struggle for working class communities, of which ethnic minorities are kind of significantly represented. It's a joint change. I mean, I think there's, similarly to class barriers or gender barriers within the workplace, there's also class barriers that we need to address.
Farah Elahi is a research and policy analyst at the Runnymede Trust. Farah, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Kenyans go to the